I used to think love was simple, like a perfect melody played on a warm summer evening. But that was before betrayal turned my life into a cacophony of pain and confusion. My name is Laura, and my world shattered 4 years ago when I discovered that my fiancé, Michael, had betrayed me with my sister Claire. The day I found out, everything changed. I stumbled upon the messages they had exchanged, flirty, intimate, and filled with lies. I remember standing in my kitchen, heart racing, feeling as if the ground had vanished beneath me. How could they do this? My sister, who had always been the favored child, had crossed the line. The betrayal felt like a blade piercing through my heart, and I couldn't take it. I went scorched earth on both of them, severing every tie that had once connected us. Michael tried to return to me, groveling for forgiveness as if it were something I could hand back like a lost toy. But I couldn't even look at him without feeling sick. He was gone, and so was any hope of reclaiming my former life. My parents, initially sympathetic to my plight, began to shift their loyalty to Claire after her breakdown following Michael's rejection. They claimed I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. It was as if I was the villain in my own story. So I cut them out too. I needed space to heal, so I packed my bags and moved across the country for grad school. In the midst of all this chaos, my grandmother Margaret became my sanctuary. She was the only one who truly understood my pain. Margaret supported me in ways my parents never did, always encouraging me to follow my dreams and be my own person. When I received news that she was sick, I returned home to care for her, feeling grateful for the chance to repay her kindness. Her passing left me devastated. I had lost the only family member who truly had my back. After the funeral, I found myself in a familiar town filled with old ghosts. I was not prepared for what came next. The reading of the will revealed secrets I never expected. Margaret had left me everything: her house, her savings, her cherished belongings. I had anticipated something small, a token of her love, but this was life-changing. It was a fortune that would set me up for life. As the lawyer read through the details, my parents' faces twisted with disbelief. My father, Mark, and mother, Julia, exchanged looks of outrage. They had assumed they would be included, especially for Claire, who was struggling to make ends meet. They claimed Margaret had made a mistake, that I didn't need the money, and that it could secure Claire's future. But what they didn't realize was that this inheritance was not just about money. It was a symbol of freedom from their toxic grasp. My grandmother had made her intentions crystal clear in her letters and the video she recorded with her attorney. The revelation stirred something deep within me, igniting a flame I thought had extinguished long ago. "Laura, you should share this," Mark insisted, his voice laced with urgency. "Think of your sister. She needs help more than you do." I felt my heart race, a mixture of anger and betrayal coursing through my veins. Did they really think I owed them anything? Claire had betrayed me in the worst way, and my parents had chosen her side when I needed them most. I had sacrificed so much for their approval, and now they wanted me to give up my grandmother's legacy too. "No," I replied, my voice steady. Margaret's wishes were clear. "This is mine." They pushed back, accusing me of being vindictive. Part of me couldn't deny that some of my feelings stemmed from resentment, but I was done being the scapegoat in this twisted family drama. The more they pressured me, the more I realized that this inheritance was my chance to break free from the past. As I stood in the lawyer's office, I felt a newfound strength rising within me. I wasn't just defending my grandmother's wishes. I was reclaiming my life. The betrayal would no longer define me. This would be the beginning of my journey, a journey not just toward financial independence, but toward emotional liberation. And as I left the office, I knew one thing. I was ready to face my family and hold them accountable for the years of pain they had caused me. My relationship with Claire had always been complicated, even before the betrayal. As kids, we were like oil and water, constantly at odds, yet tied together by blood. I suppose it didn't help that my parents always seemed to favor her. Claire was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. Growing up in her shadow wasn't easy, and I often felt like an outsider in my own family. But nothing could have prepared me for how deep her cruelty ran. Claire had a talent for manipulation, always knowing how to twist situations in her favor. As we got older, I convinced myself that it was normal sibling rivalry, that maybe I was just imagining the slights, the way she always seemed to undermine me at every turn. But the affair with Michael was the final straw. It shattered the fragile illusion that we could ever be close. Michael and I had been together for 5 years by then. We were high school sweethearts, and I genuinely believed we'd spend the rest of our lives together. He was charming, funny, and for the longest time, I thought he was my best friend. We had talked about marriage, kids, building a life together, but all of that crumbled the moment I found out he had been seeing Claire behind my back. The way I found out was almost cinematic in its cruelty. I was at home, scrolling through Michael's phone, trying to find a picture we had taken the previous weekend. That's when I saw it. A message from Claire. It was short, almost casual. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My heart stopped. I felt a wave of nausea crash over me, but I forced myself to keep scrolling. The messages went back months. They had been meeting up in secret, lying to me for who knows how long. I confronted Michael first. He tried to lie, of course, said it wasn't what it looked like, that it was just one mistake. But the evidence was too damning. In that moment, I saw him for who he really was. Someone who couldn't be trusted, someone who had betrayed the very foundation of our relationship. I kicked him out of my apartment, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. Then came Claire. Unlike Michael, she didn't even try to deny it. She stood there, arms crossed, a smug look on her face, as if she had won some twisted competition. "He was always too good for you," she had said. That line replayed in my head for months after, like an echo I couldn't escape. I didn't just lose my fiancé that day. I lost whatever shred of family connection I had left with her. After the truth came out, my parents were furious at both of them. For a brief moment, I thought they might finally understand my pain, that maybe I wasn't the problem after all. But the peace didn't last long. Claire had a nervous breakdown shortly after Michael dumped her, and that changed everything. My parents, Mark and Julia, rushed to her side, pleading with me to forgive and forget. "She's your sister," they would say, as if that erased the betrayal. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Their pleas fell on deaf ears, and soon enough, they stopped asking. The family dinners became less frequent, and eventually, we stopped speaking altogether. I packed my bags and left town, seeking solace in the anonymity of a new city. Grad school was my escape, a chance to rebuild my life far away from the chaos of my family. Living on the other side of the country gave me the space I needed to heal. It wasn't easy. I was constantly haunted by memories of what had happened. Some nights, I'd lie awake wondering how my life had spiraled so far out of control. But over time, I managed to piece myself back together. I threw myself into my studies, worked long hours, and slowly my heart began to mend. I built a new life, one that didn't revolve around Michael, Claire, or my parents, but the scars never fully healed. Even with all the distance I put between us, I couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal. It wasn't just about Michael's infidelity. It was about the way my family had abandoned me when I needed them most. They had chosen Claire, the golden child, once again over me, and that knowledge burned like a fire inside me. During those years, the only person who remained in my corner was my grandmother, Margaret. She had always been the one person who saw me for who I really was. She knew about the affair and was disgusted by it, standing firmly on my side when everyone else wavered. When she found out I had moved, she called me almost every week, checking in to make sure I was doing okay. Margaret never judged me for leaving. In fact, she encouraged it. "Sometimes," she said, "you have to put yourself first." Her words became my mantra. Even as the distance between me and my family grew, Margaret and I stayed close. When she got sick, I was devastated, but I knew I had to go back to take care of her. It was the least I could do for the one person who had always stood by me. So I made arrangements to work remotely and return to my hometown, the place I had once sworn never to return to. It was strange being back after all those years. Everywhere I went, there were reminders of my old life. The coffee shop where Michael and I had spent lazy afternoons, the park where we used to walk, the family home where countless arguments had taken place. It felt like I was walking through a ghost town, haunted by memories of people who were no longer part of my life. Taking care of Margaret was hard, but it was also healing in a way. She was still sharp as ever, even in her final days, and we spent hours talking about everything and nothing. She never once brought up Claire or Michael, and for that I was grateful. It was as if she knew that bringing up the past would only reopen old wounds. When she passed away, I was heartbroken. It felt like the last piece of my old life had slipped away, leaving me completely adrift. But I didn't have time to dwell on the pain for long. Margaret had left behind a complicated will, and I soon found myself entangled in a new web of family drama. After Margaret passed, I was in a haze of grief. She had been my anchor, the one person who truly cared about me in that storm of betrayal. I expected the funeral to be a quiet affair, but of course my family found a way to turn it into another scene. Mark and Julia sat together, eyes red with tears, but I knew they were more focused on appearances than anything else. Claire was absent, which wasn't a surprise. She never liked Margaret, probably because Margaret had always seen through her manipulations. The tension in the room was palpable, but I tried to ignore it. I had come to honor my grandmother, not to deal with whatever new drama my family had in store. The real shock came a few days after the funeral, when we gathered for the reading of Margaret's will. I had assumed she would leave something small for me, maybe a piece of jewelry or some mementos. Margaret was never one for grand gestures, and I didn't need anything more than the love she had given me. The lawyer's office was quiet when I arrived. Mark and Julia were already there, sitting stiffly, their faces tight with anticipation. They barely acknowledged me when I walked in. I had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The lawyer, an older man with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, began reading the will in a calm, measured tone. At first, everything seemed normal. Margaret had left a few small items to distant relatives and friends, nothing out of the ordinary. But when he reached my name, I felt the room shift. "Margaret has left the bulk of her estate to Laura," the lawyer said, his voice unwavering. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I looked around, waiting for someone to correct him, but the room was silent. My parents' faces turned from pale to flushed in seconds. I could feel their eyes burning into me, but I didn't know what to say. Margaret had left me everything: her house, her savings, her investments. It was more money than I had ever imagined, enough to completely change the course of my life. I don't understand," Julia stammered, breaking the silence. "She left everything to Laura?" The lawyer nodded, flipping through some papers. "That's correct. In addition to her house and savings, there are significant assets that will now be transferred to Laura's name." Mark sat in stunned silence, while Julia seemed on the verge of tears. I could see the disbelief etched across their faces. Claire had always been the one they looked out for, and I knew they had expected something for her, something that could help her out of the financial mess she had made of her life. But Margaret had left almost everything to me. Then the lawyer pulled out a letter, Margaret's final words. He unfolded it carefully, reading aloud her intentions. "To Laura," the letter began, "I leave my estate because I know she will honor my wishes. She was there for me in my final days, just as I have always been there for her. I trust her to carry forward the legacy of our family with grace and strength." I felt a lump in my throat. This was Margaret's way of telling me that she believed in me, even in death. But then the letter continued, and the tension in the room rose. "To Mark and Julia, I leave only enough to settle the debt I know you've incurred. I am deeply disappointed in the way you treated Laura during her hardest times. You chose to protect Claire, despite her betrayals, and that is something I cannot forgive." There it was, the truth laid bare in Margaret's final words. My parents sat in stunned silence as the lawyer continued. "To Claire, I leave nothing. I cannot condone her actions, and I hope that someday she will realize the harm she has caused." The room felt like it was closing in. My parents looked as though they had been slapped. I knew in that moment that this would not end peacefully. The lawyer finished reading, folded the papers, and handed me the keys to my grandmother's house. I sat there, clutching them in my hands, unable to process what had just happened. Once the formalities were over, the storm began. "This isn't right," Julia hissed, her face flushed with anger. "You don't need this money, Laura. You make more than both of us combined. Claire's struggling. She can't even hold down a job. You can't just take everything." I was too stunned to reply at first. Part of me had expected this, but hearing it out loud made my heart pound. They were turning this into another moment of guilt, another attempt to make me feel responsible for Claire's failures. "I'm just following Margaret's wishes," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is what she wanted." Mark finally spoke, his voice quieter but no less intense. She was angry when she wrote that. She wasn't thinking clearly. "You know your grandmother. She was always quick to judge, but you can make this right. Share it with us. Claire needs help. We all do." I stared at them, my mind racing. They were asking me to betray Margaret's final wishes, just like they had betrayed me when I needed them most. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, years of resentment threatening to spill over, but I held it back, forcing myself to stay calm. "No," I said firmly, my voice more confident now. "Margaret's wishes were clear. She left this to me for a reason. I'm not sharing it." Julia's face twisted with fury. "You're being vindictive. You're still holding on to what happened with Claire, aren't you?" That was years ago, Laura. People make mistakes. You're punishing us all for something that's in the past. The words hit me like a slap. Maybe there was some truth in what she said. Maybe part of me was still angry, still hurt, but that didn't change the fact that Margaret had made her decision, and I wasn't going to dishonor her by giving in to their demands. I'm not punishing anyone, I replied, my voice steady. I'm honoring Margaret's wishes. Julia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You'll regret this, she spat, storming out of the office. Mark followed her, his expression unreadable. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty chairs where my parents had just been. The silence felt heavy, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life. Margaret had given me more than just money. She had given me the chance to finally break free from the toxic hold my family had on me. As I left the lawyer's office, I knew that this was only the beginning. My parents weren't going to give up easily, and Claire was still out there waiting to insert herself into the drama. But for now, I had won the first battle, and that was enough. It didn't take long for the pressure to mount. My parents, Mark and Julia, weren't the type to let things go. A few days after the reading of the will, the phone calls started. First from my mother, then from my father. They were polite at first, pretending to be concerned about how I was handling everything in the aftermath of Margaret's passing. But it didn't take long before they got to the real reason for their calls. You know, Julia began on one of our strained conversations, this isn't just about money. Claire needs help, Laura. She's struggling, emotionally and financially. We've done what we can, but we're not getting any younger. You don't want to see your sister homeless, do you? The guilt they tried to pile onto me was relentless. I could hear the manipulation in her voice, the familiar tone she used whenever she wanted something. It was always the same. Claire was the victim, and I was the one expected to fix everything. I could feel the resentment boiling up inside me, the years of being overlooked in favor of my sister now coming to a head. I'm not responsible for Claire, I said firmly, holding the phone to my ear as I paced around Margaret's old living room. The house was quiet, the memories of my grandmother's calm presence still lingering in the air. She's an adult. She made her choices. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sharp sigh. That's cold, Laura. You're really going to leave your sister to fend for herself? After everything we've been through as a family? Family. The word felt foreign in my mouth now. What kind of family had they been to me when I needed them most? They had chosen Claire time and time again, even after she betrayed me in the most personal way. And now they expected me to step in and save her because she couldn't manage her own life? I felt a surge of anger. You didn't care about family when you took Claire's side after she slept with Michael, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Why should I care now? Laura, that's in the past, Julia insisted, her tone more exasperated now. You can't keep holding on to that. Claire made a mistake, but she's your sister. I closed my eyes, trying to remain calm. It wasn't just about Claire's mistake. It was about years of feeling second best. Years of being overshadowed, ignored, and now they wanted me to bail out the very person who had ruined my life. I'm not sharing the inheritance, I said again, more resolute this time. Margaret left it to me for a reason. If she wanted Claire to have something, she would have left it to her. Mark stepped in after that, trying a softer approach. Laura, we understand that this is hard for you, but we're not asking for much. Just something to make sure Claire is taken care of. We'll even take less than an equal share if that's what it takes, but think about it. Do you really want this hanging over your head, knowing that you could have helped and chose not to? I wanted to scream. They were twisting the situation again, making it seem like I was the bad guy for not wanting to give away what was rightfully mine. It was a battle I didn't want to fight, but they weren't giving me a choice. Each phone call felt like a test of my willpower, and I was growing tired of it. I've already made my decision, I replied, my voice tight. This conversation is over. The calls didn't stop, though. Day after day, they kept coming. Sometimes from my parents, sometimes from Claire herself. At first, she tried to play the victim, calling me with a sob story about how hard life had been for her. She spoke of her mental health struggles, how she couldn't keep a steady job, and how the stress of everything was getting too much to bear. Laura, you don't understand, Claire said during one of our calls, her voice trembling with what I knew was fake vulnerability. I'm not doing well. I've been in and out of jobs, and I'm scared of what's going to happen when Mom and Dad can't support me anymore. I didn't mean for things to turn out like this. I stayed silent, letting her talk. Part of me was waiting for some sign of genuine remorse, some acknowledgement of the pain she had caused me, but that moment never came. Instead, She went on about herself, how everything was falling apart for her, how she needed help to get back on her feet. It was always about her. "You made your choices, Claire," I said finally, trying to keep my voice steady. "You chose to betray me, and now you're dealing with the consequences of those choices. I'm not responsible for fixing your life." Her tone shifted immediately, from soft and pitiful to sharp and accusatory. "So this is revenge, then? You're punishing me for something that happened years ago? You're not even giving me a chance to make things right." I clenched my jaw, the familiar anger flaring up again. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about boundaries. I've set mine, and you need to respect that." "You're selfish," she snapped. "You've always been selfish, just like Margaret. This is why no one wanted to be around you growing up." That was it, the final straw. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with anger. How had this become my life? I had built a new life for myself, far away from their drama, and yet here I was, being dragged back into it. As the days passed, the pressure only grew. My parents started showing up at Margaret's house unannounced, knocking on the door, hoping to catch me when I couldn't avoid them. They begged, pleaded, and even tried to guilt-trip me into reconsidering. But I was firm. This inheritance wasn't theirs to take, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into giving it away. One evening, Mark cornered me in the driveway as I was coming back from the store. He looked tired, worn down by the constant back and forth, but instead of softening, his frustration finally boiled over. "Do you even care about this family anymore?" he asked, his voice rising. "Is this really who you are now? Someone who would let her own sister fall apart while you sit on a pile of money?" I stopped, my keys still in my hand. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years, and realized something. This wasn't about Claire. It was about control. My parents had always controlled me, always made me feel like I wasn't enough. And now they were angry because I was standing up for myself for the first time. "I care about myself, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "For once, I'm putting myself first. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who needs to think about what kind of family we really are." He stared at me, speechless, and I turned and walked inside. As the door closed behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't going to let them push me around anymore. I had my boundaries, and I was finally strong enough to hold them. But even as I stood there, the weight of their words still lingered. I knew this wasn't the end. My family wasn't going to back down that easily. The tension between my family and me had reached a boiling point, and the relentless pressure was wearing me down. But something in me refused to bend, even as their guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation grew more intense. I knew that giving in wouldn't just mean giving up the inheritance. It would mean giving up my freedom, my right to finally choose myself over the toxic patterns that had shaped my entire life. It was during one of those sleepless nights, pacing through Margaret's house, that I stumbled upon the truth. I had been going through some of her old things, sorting through boxes of memories that held pieces of her life before she passed. One box in particular caught my eye. A small, unmarked one that had been tucked away in the corner of the attic, hidden beneath old blankets and dusty heirlooms. I opened it and found a collection of letters, all written in Margaret's familiar, delicate handwriting. Most were addressed to me, letters she had written over the years but never sent. Some were about her pride in my accomplishments. Others were just her thoughts on life, on family. But buried beneath them was a thick envelope, addressed to Mark and Julia. Curious, I unfolded the letter inside and began to read. The contents of that letter hit me like a freight train. Margaret had known everything, every betrayal, every lie that had been whispered behind closed doors. In her calm, measured words, she laid it all out. How Claire had manipulated my parents for years, playing them against me even when we were children. How she had planted seeds of doubt in their minds, convincing them that I was the problem whenever things didn't go her way. And worst of all, how the affair with Michael had been part of a long-standing pattern of Claire trying to take everything that mattered to me, simply because she couldn't stand seeing me succeed. But Margaret had seen through it all. She wrote about how disappointed she was in Mark and Julia for being blind to Claire's manipulations, for always choosing to believe the best about their golden child while casting me aside. She wrote about how deeply it had hurt her to watch me suffer, knowing that the very people who were supposed to protect me had abandoned me when I needed them most. The betrayal ran even deeper than I'd realized. Claire hadn't just betrayed me with Michael. She had been working against me for years, undermining my relationships, sabotaging opportunities, all while smiling sweetly and pretending to be the perfect sister. And my parents had let her. They had enabled her because it was easier to believe that I was the difficult one than to admit that their beloved daughter was a master manipulator. I sat there in stunned silence, the letter shaking in my hands. My mind raced as the puzzle pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about the inheritance, or even the affair. This was about years of deceit, years of me being cast as the villain in my own story while Claire played the victim. I felt a wave of fury rise inside me, hot and sharp. How could they have done this to me? How could my own family have let one person twist everything, turning me into the outsider while they rallied around the one who had been pulling the strings all along? The anger fueled me, giving me a sense of clarity I hadn't had in years. I had spent so long wondering if I was wrong, if I was the one who was being unreasonable. But now I knew the truth. Claire had orchestrated it all, and my parents had willingly played along. I had given them too much grace. I had allowed myself to be convinced that maybe, just maybe, they didn't fully understand the damage they had done. But now I realized they had always known. They had just chosen to ignore it because it was easier than confronting the ugly truth about their perfect daughter. I didn't waste any time. I picked up my phone and called Julia, my heart pounding in my chest. When she answered, her voice was soft, almost tentative, as if she knew another confrontation was coming. "Laura, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but filled with cold determination. There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "If this is about the inheritance again, No," I cut her off. "This is about Claire and all the lies you've believed." For a moment there was silence, then Julia spoke again, her voice wary. "What are you talking about?" "I found Margaret's letter," I said, the words cutting through the quiet like a knife. "The one she wrote to you and Dad. She knew everything, Mom. Everything about how Claire has been manipulating you, twisting things to make me look like the bad guy for years, and you just let her." I could hear the shock in her voice when she finally responded. "Laura, that's not—" "Don't!" I snapped, my anger boiling over. "Don't you dare try to deny it. I have the proof, right here in Margaret's own words. She saw what was happening, even if you refuse to. Claire has been playing you, and you've been so blind that you let her ruin everything. My relationships, my career, my life. And now you're trying to guilt me into giving up the one thing Margaret left me, because you think Claire deserves it?" I could hear Julia stammering, searching for words, but I wasn't done. "I'm done being the scapegoat in this family," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "Margaret left me that inheritance because she knew I was the only one who would honor her wishes. And I'm not giving a single cent to Claire. She's taken enough from me already." Julia's voice broke through, sounding more desperate now. "Laura, we didn't know. We thought—" "You thought what?" I spat, my anger finally spilling over. "That I was the problem? That Claire was perfect, and I was the one who needed to be fixed? You've been letting her get away with this for years, and now you want to act like you're the victims." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Julia finally spoke again, her voice was small, almost defeated. "What do you want us to do?" I paused, my anger simmering but controlled now. "I want you to leave me alone. Stop trying to manipulate me. Stop trying to guilt me into fixing the mess you and Claire created. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine." Before Julia could respond, I hung up the phone. I stood there for a long time, the letter still in my hand, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. The truth was out now. They couldn't hide behind their lies anymore. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. Claire had taken so much from me, but she wasn't going to take this. Margaret's legacy was mine, and I was finally strong enough to protect it. I had uncovered the betrayal that had been hidden for so long, and now I was ready to face whatever came next. The moment I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The truth had finally been spoken, the lies uncovered, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't drowning under the weight of my family's expectations and manipulations. It was like a weight had been lifted from my chest, leaving me free to breathe, to think, to decide what I wanted. It didn't take long for me to realize that I needed to take control, not just of the inheritance, but of my life. I had spent too long reacting to my family's games, too long trying to prove myself or escape their influence. It was time to do something more, something that would ensure they couldn't touch me anymore. As I sat there in Margaret's living room, her letter still open in front of me, a plan began to form. I wasn't just going to walk away from this mess. I was going to turn it into something meaningful, something that would honor Margaret's memory, something that would give me peace, and something that would ensure that my parents and Claire could never hold any power over me again. I pulled out a notebook and began to sketch out the details of my plan. The more I wrote, the clearer it became. Margaret had left me everything because she trusted me, because she believed in me, and because she knew I was capable of something bigger than the petty dramas that had consumed my family for so long. I wasn't going to let her down. The first part of the plan was simple. I needed to cut ties with my parents and Claire for good. No more guilt, no more manipulation, no more trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. I would close the door on that chapter of my life and never look back. But the second part of the plan, that was where things got interesting. I wasn't just going to keep the inheritance for myself. No, I was going to use it to build something far bigger than anything my family could ever have imagined. I decided to establish a foundation in Margaret's name, a charitable organization dedicated to helping women who, like me, had been betrayed by the people closest to them. It would be a place where women could find support, resources, and the strength to rebuild their lives after betrayal and manipulation. It would be a way to turn my pain into purpose and to ensure that Margaret's legacy would live on, not just through me, but through the lives of countless others. The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back control of my narrative. By using the inheritance to create something meaningful, I was turning the tables on Claire and my parents. They had expected me to give in, to share the wealth, to let them dictate how I should live my life. But instead, I was going to take that money and invest it in something that helped other people, something they could never benefit from. It was the ultimate act of defiance and the ultimate act of closure. I spent the next few weeks putting the pieces of the plan together. I contacted lawyers, financial advisors, and people in the nonprofit world to help me get the foundation off the ground. I didn't tell my parents or Claire anything about what I was doing. As far as they knew, I was still holding firm on keeping the inheritance, and they continued to try and pressure me, but I ignored their calls, their texts, their emails. I didn't owe them anything, and they didn't deserve to know what I was building. Finally, everything was in place. The Margaret Foundation was officially established, with a mission to support women who had experienced betrayal and manipulation in their personal lives. I set up programs that provided legal advice, financial education, counseling, and other resources to help women regain their independence after toxic relationships or family dynamics. It was everything I wished I had had when my life had fallen apart. And it felt incredible to know that I was using my grandmother's legacy to make a difference. But the real satisfaction came when I made the final move of my plan, inviting my parents to the launch event for the foundation. I wasn't sure they would show up, but they did. I had sent the invitation in the most neutral way possible, with no explanation beyond the fact that this event was to honor Margaret's memory. I wanted them to see what I had done with the inheritance. I wanted them to understand that I had moved on, that I didn't need them, or their approval, or their guilt anymore. When they arrived at the event, I could see the confusion on their faces. The room was filled with people, women who had already benefited from the foundation's resources, community leaders, donors, and others who had supported the project. There were photos of Margaret displayed throughout the venue, along with stories of how her legacy was already helping women find new strength after betrayal. Mark and Julia approached me, looking bewildered. Claire was nowhere in sight, but I didn't care. This moment wasn't about her. It was about me finally breaking free from all of them. "Laura, what is all this?" Julia asked, her voice tinged with confusion. I smiled, a calm, confident smile that I hadn't worn in years. "This is the Margaret Foundation," I said. "I've used the inheritance to create a charity in her name. It's going to help women who have been betrayed by the people they trusted most. Women like me." They stared at me, speechless, and I continued, my voice steady. "Margaret believed in me even when you didn't. She saw what I was capable of, and now I'm using what she left me to help others. This is what I've chosen to do with the inheritance. It's not for you or for Claire, it's for the women who actually need it." Mark looked like he wanted to say something, but he stayed silent. Julia's face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. They hadn't expected this. They had expected me to hoard the money, or to finally cave and share it. But they hadn't expected me to turn it into something bigger than all of us. "This is what Margaret would have wanted," I added, my voice softening but still firm. "She always believed in helping others, and now I'm continuing her legacy in a way that honors her. You might not agree with it, but this is my decision." Julia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Finally, she just nodded, looking away as if she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. I didn't linger after that. I had said what I needed to say. I had done what I needed to do. and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The event went on, filled with laughter, gratitude, and hope. I watched as women shared their stories, their gratitude for the help they had received through the foundation. It was a feeling I couldn't describe, a mix of pride, relief, and a sense of closure I hadn't thought was possible. By the end of the night, my parents had slipped out quietly. I didn't expect to hear from them again, and I was okay with that. The chapter was closed. The toxic hold they had over me was gone, replaced by something far more meaningful. As I stood in the midst of the celebration, I knew that I had won, not just against them, but against the part of myself that had once doubted my worth. I had taken the pain, the betrayal, and the anger, and turned it into something beautiful. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was freedom, and I was finally, truly free. As the event wound down, I found a quiet corner in the venue and took a moment to reflect. The day had been a whirlwind, but it was the kind of whirlwind that left me feeling lighter, not burdened. For years, I had carried the weight of betrayal, of constantly feeling like I wasn't enough, like I had to prove something to my family or seek their approval. But standing there, surrounded by the impact of what I had created, I realized I didn't need any of that anymore. The Margaret Foundation wasn't just a charity, it was a testament to my resilience, to my ability to take control of my own narrative. It was a way of honoring the one person who had believed in me when no one else did. And it was my way of making sure that other women didn't have to go through what I had endured, at least, not alone. As I gazed at the photos of Margaret smiling softly in frames across the room, I felt a deep sense of closure. She would have been proud not just of the foundation, but of the woman I had become, stronger, more confident, and finally free from the toxic ties that had held me down for so long. I walked outside into the cool night air, breathing deeply as I looked up at the stars. There was no bitterness left in me. The anger and hurt that had fueled me for so long had transformed into something else, something more productive, more fulfilling. And with that transformation came peace. I hadn't heard from Claire since the last time she'd tried to manipulate me into sharing the inheritance. Part of me wondered if she even knew about the foundation, or if she would even care. She had always been focused on herself, on what she could take from others, but none of that mattered anymore. Claire was a part of my past that I had finally let go of. I didn't need her apologies, her remorse, or even her acknowledgement. She was no longer part of my story. As for my parents, I knew they would continue to live in their own reality, trying to justify their actions, trying to cling to the idea that they had been right all along. But that, too, was something I no longer needed to concern myself with. I had done what Margaret had wanted. I had done what I had wanted. And that was enough. I spent the next few days closing up Margaret's house, packing away the last few remnants of her life. It was bittersweet, saying goodbye to the woman who had been my anchor, my guide through the storm. But I knew she wasn't really gone. Her influence, her wisdom, her love, they were all still with me, woven into the fabric of who I had become. As I packed the final box and shut the door behind me, I didn't feel the sadness I had expected. Instead, I felt ready to move forward, ready to start a new chapter. I moved out of Margaret's house and returned to the life I had built for myself, the life I had created far away from my family's chaos. The Margaret Foundation became my focus, and with each passing day, I found more fulfillment in the work I was doing. The stories of the women we helped, their resilience and strength, only fueled my determination to make the foundation grow. In many ways, I felt like I was building a new family, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and support. As time went on, the memory of the betrayal that had once consumed me began to fade. It would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I had taken the pain and turned it into something beautiful, something lasting. One evening, months after the foundation's launch, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Julia. My first instinct was to throw it away, to ignore whatever she had to say, but something made me open it. The letter was brief, more of an acknowledgement than an apology. She wrote that she had seen the work I was doing with the foundation and that she was proud of me, though she never said those exact words. There was no apology, no admission of guilt or wrongdoing, but that was okay. I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't need anything from them. I folded the letter and put it away, feeling surprisingly at peace. It was a final acknowledgement of sorts, a quiet nod to the fact that we had all moved on in our own ways. As I stood there, looking out the window at the sunset, I realized something important. Life wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving people wrong or making them pay for the pain they had caused. It was about finding your own peace, your own sense of purpose, and holding on to it with everything you had. I had found that peace, and I wasn't going to let it go. The years of betrayal and manipulation were behind me. I had created something lasting, something that would continue to make a difference long after I was gone. And in doing so, I had reclaimed my life, my story, and my future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of completion, like the final chapter of a long, difficult book had come to a close. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new, something entirely my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.